All right, three players on the 2025 South Carolina defense who I think are going to be potential breakout players and who's on the clock with spring practice just a week or two away. We talk about that, some baseball injury news, a baseball win on Friday night, and much more. Locked On Gamecocks starts right now.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, guys? Welcome into Locked On Gamecocks. I'm your host, Chris Marler. Hope everyone's having a fantastic Friday. It is the first of two shows every day this weekend back in Lexington, South Carolina. Before we get started, I want to say thank you to everyone making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen each and every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Remember, we're a free and available podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. You guys have heard me talk about them before. You're going to hear me talk about them again. They do a great job. And now new users, right now, after signing up, if you make one $5 bet and you win, you get $150 in free bonus bets immediately after that. So go join FanDuel today, America's #1 sportsbook, where everything is better. So, all right, let's get into today's show. Three potential breakout players on the defense, and this is something that is just honesty hour. I have really kind of tiptoed around talking about the defense. I know it's early on in the offseason, all that kind of stuff, but one of the main reasons why that is because there's just so much production and talent and veteran leadership and you name it that's going to be lost from last year's defense to this year. Now, the first part of that is it's concerning for sure because there's so much talent you have to replace. Like you have two All-Americans you have to replace. You have all three starting linebackers that account for 40% of your tackles. You have 3 or 4 guys in the interior defensive line that, oh, by the way, not only were they great in their 4th and 5th senior years, but also they had 4 sacks from a position that you rarely get to the quarterback. Like the production was great, the veteran leadership. Like it's very hard to replace all the boxes they checked as players here at South Carolina. So it's concerning. There's just a lot of talent you have to replace going into next year. Here's the good news. You have one of the best, if not the best, defensive coordinators in the entire SEC, one of the best in the country as well, Clayton White. You know the defense is going to show up because that's been a staple of what this team has done, whether they've been a 9-win team, a 5-win team, or anything in between with Clayton White. 88 turnovers in 4 years, by far the most in the SEC. They had 17 turnovers in the red zone 2 years ago. Like they do a tremendous job. Sometimes it's bend but don't break. But last year you saw it was just a top 15 or 20 defense nationally week in and week out. So I'm not super worried because there's so many players that started last year. No one knew that Kyle Kennard was going to be the SEC Defensive Player of the Year at all. It makes me have a lot of like silent confidence with the staff and their track record of developing and all that kind of stuff, the things we talked about. As far as breakout players go, it's hard not to start at the linebacking position because that's where you lose the most production, like seemingly. You lose all 3 linebackers, right? You lose Debo Williams. You lose Demetrius Knight Jr. I mean, you lose everyone there. Again, 40% of your total tackles were with those 3 players. So how do you replace it? Well, the first player I think is going to have a breakout year, Fred Johnson. Most plain, just sounds like a neighbor. Just sounds like a 62-year-old neighbor, somebody that I would ask for like lawn care tips from. Fred Johnson, also a former 4-star recruit, top 110, 15 player in the country, one of the highest rated prospects on this team, right behind Dylan Stewart. This kid is physically gifted and physically ready to contribute this year. Didn't really have as many moments on the field last year, especially in like a defensive standpoint. Played a lot of special teams, a lot of snaps there. But now it's a guy that I think is a year in this defense, is also, he's the youngest in the room kind of, but he's also the oldest because he's the most familiar with Clayton White, what he expects, the scheme, all of that. South Carolina did a tremendous job going into the transfer portal and getting really good linebackers. You got, I think, 3 from Alabama alone. One, Sean Murphy, who's a former top 150 recruit, 4-star, kind of similar to Fred Johnson. And the other kid, Justin Oronquo, the German linebacker who's 6'2", 230. You guys have heard me rave about him before. He's also on the short list, but I'm kind of leaning more towards younger players for this one. Fred Johnson is the most familiar with this system, with the program, what's expected, all that stuff, more so than the transfer guys. Not only does that kind of give him a leg up, it also provides a unique opportunity for him to kind of be a leader moving forward, which you are missing from last year's defense because you lost your all-everything guy, Debo Williams, who was the alpha, the QB of the defense. Like, maybe Nick Evenwar is probably a better fit for the alpha, but you know what I'm saying. It's a really unique opportunity because there's so much potential of what could become. Like, you heard me mention this earlier, and it's not just waxing poetic. Like, you think about the guys on that defense and that team a year ago that are gone now. The amount of boxes they checked, it wasn't just really physically talented players. It wasn't just really good years and great production. It wasn't just a veteran guy that had been, in college, like football for 4, 5, 6 years. It was all those things and more. I mean, Nick Evenwar, you could argue he's meant more to this defense than almost anyone. Like, probably a top 5 most important, impactful defensive player in this program for the last 10 years. It's hard to replace that. I have zero doubt that there's people that are talented in that secondary, but that's a guy that the laundry list of things and accolades and what he meant to the team. Oh, and by the way, he's a potential first-round draft pick. So at linebacker, it seems like there's the most obvious opportunity, right? It's also the most like statistically friendly position as well, like not the interior defensive line. So Fred Johnson is a guy that's going into year 2 of being in the weight room, being in the offseason conditioning program, all those things. I think he's going to take a huge step forward, and I'm really excited to see like the competition at that position with the other people they have coming in, like not just from the portal, but from the freshmen as well. I think you might be able to have, maybe not this year, but setting yourself up for the next 1 to 2 years. That linebacking core last year was awesome. This one might be deeper, like right off the bat. So day one, the player I'm arguably most excited about taking a step forward and having a breakout spring. So by the time that spring game ends, we're talking about, like, you know what, that guy was flying all over the field the spring game. He's clearly going to be like the guy in the middle of that defense. Like, whew, at least we have that in place, right? At least we have that in place. Tons of question marks at different positions, all that kind of stuff. The portal's going to open, but at least we know for a fact that guy is going to be a foundation and a concrete stone in the middle of that defense. That's the first one. Now, the second, by the way, this has nothing to do with how good of a football player he is at all. But Fred Johnson, if there wasn't enough to love already, how about the fact that he's switched his number to 0? So he's going to take over Debo Williams' number. I love that. And also, let's just call it what it is. It's just kind of badass for whatever reason. I don't know why. I can't explain it, but it looks really cool. So there you go. All right, the next breakout player. Let me get a sip of this Celsius so I can keep it going. The next breakout player, I think you have to look at the defensive line. You lost so much off the defensive line, and it was, like I said, really, really good veteran guys. Like, that's different than the linebacking core, because I know Debo was there for 2-3 years and put up like all SEC seasons like in 2023. But you talk about what Tonka Hemingway did, TJ Sanders, Huntley, like the list just kept going. And from that position to have 4 sacks as an interior defensive lineman, that's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. What it also tells me is they were kind of feasting on like the opportunities that were kind of probably presenting themselves because of all the focus on Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart. You got to figure out somebody to be the other bookend of that defensive line, like the other side to rush the quarterback on the opposite side of Dylan Stewart, because he is not going to get a lot of one-on-one matchups. Like, if he does, he's not going to get a lot of second chances to have to do that again, because you cannot block him one-on-one. You can't. In the interior defensive line, there is one player, and maybe I'm just going to be dead wrong about this, but for whatever reason, I just feel very high on this kid. Now, he's got to get bigger physically. Physically, he's got to get bigger. We're going to talk about it as soon as we come back. Don't go. You're going to enjoy it, I promise. We'll be right back with more Locked On Gamecocks. Don't touch that dial. Okay, before we get into the second player that I think is going to be destined for a breakout spring, want to remind you once again, our friends at FanDuel. Now is a better time than ever to join and start a account. Go over to FanDuel.com. It's America's #1 sportsbook. They have all the action you can ever imagine, not even just pre, post-game, live betting lines, money line, over-unders, all those things. You can bet as the action's happening. Everything's in one convenient place for you. It's awesome. Maybe you want to put a little wager on South Carolina beating Texas tomorrow, because, by the way, you heard it here first. Tomorrow's the day. So I thought it was Ole Miss. Tomorrow's the day. South Carolina is going to get off the schneid, and they're going to win tomorrow against Texas. I don't think Texas is that good. I think it's at home. I'm telling you right now. Now, if you were to put a little wager on that, maybe $5 is all you want to put on there. Great. Because right now at FanDuel, if you put down $5 and win your first $5 bet, you will get $150 in bonus bets immediately after that. Head to FanDuel.com. Sign up today. It's America's #1 sportsbook. Make every moment more with FanDuel. All right. Your next player. I don't know why I'm so high on this kid, because he's a true freshman. He's playing a position that's very difficult to make a significant impact and be a above average player, especially in this league, coming in as a true freshman. It's Caleb Williams, the defensive tackle. He's only a 3-star recruit. He's a true freshman. As a recruit, he was listed at 6'5.5", 250 pounds, right? Again, you have to replace TJ Sanders, Tonka Hemingway, Alex Huntley, DeAndre Jules. You added Gabriel Brownlee Dindy, the greatest law firm name on the team. But there's a reason I have Caleb on here more than Dindy. And Dindy had he is one of the highest ranked prospects and recruits out of high school that, like, in the history of the South Carolina football program. Like, if he would have committed to South Carolina out of high school, it would have been one of the highest ranked recruits in the history of the program, right behind Clowney and right behind Lattimore. That's how big of a recruit he was. He just has not figured it out yet. And to be fair, he was behind a lot of really, really like elite talent on that defensive line and front seven in College Station for A&M. Like, remember, like, he was a part of the class that was the highest ranked recruiting class in the history of college football. 9 5-stars. I mean, they had Walter Nolan, they had Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart. Like, I mean, they had dudes everywhere. Like this past year, Nick Scorton, like, really, really good. And sometimes it takes a couple like players longer for the light to come on, and that may be the case with him. But being in school or in college for 2 to 3 years and still not having a lot of production or hardly any at all, I feel more confident looking at a kid like Caleb Williams, who, again, 6'5.5", 250 as a recruit. In the spring, like, not media guide, but like the list of like player numbers, height, and weight, he's listed at 6'5", 290. You remember last year when Dylan Stewart came on campus in January, and he was kind of a lanky 240, 250. And by the end of the summer, he had a picture of him shirtless and went viral because of the transformation his body made in just 7 to 8 months. He was 270 pounds. Obviously, you saw like what that looked like on the field. Just the transformation from these kids when they get into these type of facilities with these types of coaches and this type of training, for some of them, it's unbelievable. That may be the case here. He's going to need it because even at 290, he's still a little bit undersized. I love the fact that he's 6'5.5", and will be an instant threat, I think, at kind of like pushing the pocket and getting to the quarterback. At this stage, I would venture to say he's probably a better pass rusher at his position than he is a run stopper. And none of that has anything to do with his talent or scouting or anything like that. It's primarily because he's 18 years old and he's playing a position where he's going to be going up against grown-ass men at, 6'4", 330-pound interior offensive lineman. That's difficult. Like, that's just difficult, like, to be 3 and 4 years behind physically. Now, that being said, I think that this kid is going to have a really big impact this season. For whatever reason. I think partly because you saw how much like all the playing time, all the rotation, like all the production that went like around like from like those four guys we mentioned like earlier, not just Kennard and Stewart, but like on the interior. I mean, they were all really good. And a lot of that's coaching. And the other part of it is, like somebody's got to replace them, right? And I think like Monkel Goodwine's a guy I think is going to be really good as well. Like physically, 306 pounds. I think he dropped 5 since he's been in like the offseason program. That guy is like physically ready to play. Obviously an elite recruit. There are guys like that on this roster right now. Caleb Williams has a chance, though, physically, to be a freak. And I just, for whatever reason, have a feeling that he is going to end up being a really, really, not a key member necessarily. Like he's not going to be Stewart or Kennard or maybe even Demetrius Knight like last year, but he is going to have a role and really surprise some people as a true freshman on this team. That is your second player. All right, last but not least, I don't want to go back to the linebacker, but I'm very high on a lot of the guys they have there. Like, I love Justin Oronquo. I love Sean Murphy. I'm gonna say my third player is Vicari Swain, and maybe he's already kind of broken out, but a lot of the secondary last year was kind of overshadowed by how good Nick Emanwari was and how all over the field he was, and how good the rest of the front seven was as well. I mean, the secondary was a good unit last year. Kind of young, but a really good unit. Vicari Swain, the numbers he put up, I mean, only 168 snaps. He played in all 12 games, but also a kid that only allowed 10 receptions on him all year. Only 10. The yards after catch from those 10 catches, 26 total. So a really good player on the back end of that secondary, keeping things in front of him, sure tackler, all those kind of things. He's a high-level recruit, a top 150 guy. Every time you hear a coach talk about him or like whether it be a scout or a recruiting analyst or whatever, the word that always comes up is playmaker. And this secondary is going to need a playmaker, especially with Emanwari being gone. I don't expect somebody to come in and step in right away and be as good as Nick Emanwari. Emanwari is, again, a top 5 most important, impactful, and like overall great defensive player in this program over the last 10 years. I'm not going to put him up there with DJ Swearinger because I love DJ Swearinger more than any grown adult should. He's just my favorite player. But Emanwari was awesome. I don't think you're going to have somebody that's like that. But this unit as a whole has a chance to be really, really solid and really, really good, especially with all the experience they have coming back. Now, the other player I will tell you, and it's going back to the linebacker position, and instead of going with the transfer portal, because we'll do a show on that later in the week, Donovan Darden is a guy that, for whatever reason, kind of got overlooked, kind of just got like not lost in the weeds by any means, but Donovan Darden was I think he was like a 3-star recruit. I think he was a 4-star recruit for most of his recruiting cycle, but he shot up the rankings, especially on On3. He finished the year in 247 Sports. This is their numbers. He was the 106th player in the country in their numbers. He was 213 overall in the 247 Sports composite. He shot up the On3 rankings. 6'4", 230. Guy played. He can come in and play edge, or he can play outside linebacker at a 3-4. He can do a lot of those things. Again, 3-3-5, like that's the 3-3-5 and 4-2-5 like defense, like the nickel flex that Clayton White's going to run. He will be on the outside. He'll be in a position similar to what we saw with Demetrius Knight Jr. And if you're worried about his athleticism, because it's tough to replace Demetrius Knight Jr., a guy that ran over 21 miles an hour at that size. Oh, by the way, Donovan Darden, if you just look at some of his resume out of high school, he played quarterback. He played quarterback and defensive end. What? Physically ready to go right now. There's not a lot more weight he needs to put on. He can run. He can defend. And again, like this feels very much like the staff that Beamer and Darren and like Clayton White and all those guys in those 4 walls, they saw him early, jumped on it. Because if you look at his offers, South Carolina, NC State, Illinois, Boston College, Charlotte. Tell me how the number 109 player in the country has those 5 as his top 5 offers. Carolina, NC State, Illinois, Boston College, and Charlotte. It feels very much like South Carolina saw him well before anyone else did, and then everyone else is playing catch up. Like, oh, how do we miss this kid? I don't know how much of an impact he's going to make in year one. I don't even know where he's going to fit into the offense or into the defense. But that's a kid with tremendous upside. And if you can get him in the rotation, whether it's off the edge and rushing, like maybe bring him on stunts behind Dylan Stewart, that kid could be a nightmare off the edge. So those are your 3 potential breakout players on defense going into spring. We will be back later with the 3 offensive breakout players, 3 transfer portal breakout players, and much, much more. I hope all of you have a fantastic rest of your Friday night. Go Cox. We'll see y'all later.